Hello, everyone. This is Keith Stone with the Center for Hellenic Studies, and I'm here again with Greg Nagy and with Janet and Sarah for another installment of Office Hours for version 11 of HeroesX. And today we're discussing hour 16, the question for which is as follows. If you were attending the first performance of the Agamemnon of Aeschylus in 458 BCE, would you need the background that you get from hearing about Agamemnon in a performance of the Iliad? That's a great question, because we hear a lot about Agamemnon in the Iliad. We hear a lot more in the Odyssey also, but that's not part of your question. So what did folks have to say, Sarah and Janet, about this one?
One of the participants mentioned that there are so many metaphors and signs and symbols in the play, and it would be difficult for a first-time naive audience to understand if that person does not know much about Trojan War or family of the Agamemnon. So it would be helpful to understand the play, to know a little bit about the...
Do they have examples of the symbols that they mentioned, or?
Not particularly, but Lion's Cup comes to my mind.
Yes.
To understand that you have to have eye nose as well, right? When a person who is initiated would understand the symbols and metaphors, I believe. So maybe that the participant is referring to such information.
And leaving it up to us to be knowledgeable enough to understand what they're saying.
Just as with the older versions of Aesop's fables, where the moral of the story is not spelled out, it's so easy for us when we read Aesop's fables, because the transmission we have has built into it an explanation of a takeaway, literally a moral of the story. And in the days of Aeschylus in 458, the moral had to be figured out by the listener.
What else?
Someone else is saying that, picking up on the fact that there is difference between maybe the versions that we hear. Are they, as it were, poetic license? Is it because of the different medium?
Yes. Well, I like the modern term poetic license, but almost because it's what ancient world doesn't have. In the sense that there are expectations, there are horizons of expectations for myth. And myth is not something that's just, of course, entertaining. It's the truth value for a given society. So when there are different versions of myth as transmitted by the poetry, those different versions are prized by the transmitters of those different versions, who are different, and these differences are expressed. The differences, I mean, between the different communities are expressed by the different versions of the myths. Therefore, a lot is at stake, and it's certainly not just a case of delighting a group by playing with a different version. If there are different versions in action, what that means is that maybe there are different agenda or different constituencies for the group that's being represented. In the case of the Agamemnon, for example, of Aeschylus, and I don't really think that there's anything all that different between what is said about the story of Troy in this tragedy, in this drama, and what is said in the Iliad. There are additional insights, like the metaphor, and then the actual epiphany of predatory birds. I mean epiphany because the second time around, the second time the predatory birds are mentioned, it's something that people are witnessing the Achaeans actually see those birds devouring a pregnant hare. In the case of the previous mention of the predatory birds, it's a metaphor. Oh, Agamemnon and Menelaus are just like two predatory birds who've had their nestling stolen by some predatory non-bird, like a weasel or whatever.
You're talking about the part in the first choral ode.
Yeah.
Yeah, all these birds. Yeah.
And okay, you might say it's somewhat of an innovation that in the version of the Troy story as told in the Agamemnon of Aeschylus, 458 BCE, it's very clear that both Agamemnon and Menelaus are in Argos. And in Homeric poetry, Agamemnon is in Mycenae, and that's not quite Argos. And Menelaus is in Sparta. So different politics and different mythological variants. But I'm saying that the differences aren't really accentuated. And I don't know, my impression is I could so easily read the Agamemnon and say, well, this is the Iliadic version.
Mm-hmm.
Just to challenge you, I'm ready to say that superficially it looks pretty much like that version. And even when it comes to the disrespect that Agamemnon shows towards Clytemnestra in Iliad 1, where the childhood sweetheart is dismissed as, a not so attractive sexual partner in comparison to Chryseis, who is younger and therefore more attractive to Agamemnon. That's that kind of attitude, which permeates, of course, the three tragedies of Aeschylus, is already there in the Iliad. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that on the surface, there's not that much difference. On the surface.
I have another limb for you to maybe go out on. You're talking about the difference in constituencies as a possible grounding for difference in the way stories are told.
Yes.
Or the stories that are told. If I said this formulation, what would you think of it? Differences or variations in myth are grounded in variations in ritual.
Oh, yes.
You like that?
I love that.
Is that too comprehensive or too abstract?
Okay, so one thing I really love about this is that you cannot divorce myth from ritual in at least this era. Not only that, but I'm also ready to say these days that myth is a part of ritual. So ritual becomes more and more important to me as a way to think about what the worldview is of Athens, what the worldview is of Sparta, and so on. Of course, they have very different rituals, and inside those rituals, sometimes differences in the way convergent myths are told. But it's the ritual reality. It's the programmed activity. That's one way to define ritual of different societies. And programmed activity includes programmed ways of talking about things and thinking about things. That's what really matters. And I would say, yes, they're extremely different, but when it comes to what you actually see on the surface here in the Agamemnon, you're not really thinking, wow, this is something that excludes Sparta's world altogether. It does. The 458 version of the Troy story is as if Sparta didn't exist. Whereas obviously in the Iliad and the Odyssey, even though the rough edges are smoothed over, it's very clear that that whereas Agamemnon is in Mycenae, as I say, which is, so to speak, the city that was eventually replaced by Argos, that's more complicated. I might have to circle around to that. Whereas that's the case, Menelaus is clearly from Sparta, and it becomes even more clear in the Odyssey. So you can't get away from that. And I think if a Spartan were asked this question that I'm asking, they'd say, where are we? How come Agamemnon is in Argos? Argos is an ally of Athens. What about us? What about the Homeric version? This is biased. This is not true.
Mhm.
Another participant said, no, you don't need to know about Iliad beforehand. You have enough information in the play to understand the moral of this tragedy.
Yeah, well, I think that participant is right, but the thing is, if you're a Spartan who somehow visits the Athenian festival and gets into this story, says, this is not my story. But I quite agree with you. It's pretty well buffered.
So although the events in this drama happen outside the framework, certainly of the Iliad,
Yes.
they're kind of alluded to in the Odyssey.
Yeah.
But one of the participants has, as it were, turned it around and said, well, all the backstory of the House of Atreus that we don't hear about in the Iliad at all, we get some of it here. Would it be useful to know that backstory when we're encountering the Iliad?
Oh, and that's so true. And Exhibit A would be, if we may go back to Janet's remark about the lion cub, the idea that you find an orphaned little innocent something on your doorstep is certainly relevant to the House of Atreus, because in a sense, we can't understand why it is that Aegisthus even survives to become the lover of Clytemnestra and the killer of Agamemnon. But my point remains that the whole foundling story, which is implied by the lion cub story, is nowhere to be found in the Iliad as we have it. Nowhere, nowhere. And you're quite right. We do have some of that as a background, although did you notice that when I was trying to do a write-up of all of this in the book version of our program called The Ancient Greek Hero in 24 Hours, I had to summarize as on the basis of external mythological testimonies, the whole story of the House of Atreus, because it's not really spelled out in our Agamemnon. Kind of follow along. And I must say that, I don't know, to me, the Ainos, the fable of the lion cub is not that clear. When I was in college and I was exposed to the Agamemnon, I didn't understand what the lion cub fable was about, because I didn't know about the pre-story of the House of Atreus. And even for Ancient Greek Heroes in 24 Hours, I had to cobble together that part of the story on the basis of external sources, sources external to Aeschylus's Agamemnon, libation bearers, and Eumenides. Oh, we just miss so much of what even an everyday group of people going to state theater would know.
And so you that could then take some of that knowledge that ancient Greek audience would have been familiar with, and that would then also apply to the rereading of the Iliad.
I think so. Yes, yeah. I think so. Yeah. So I frankly think that anybody who listened to the Iliad, I don't know, let's say the 6th century, would know that Agamemnon is a cad already.
Yeah.
Now, mind you, that doesn't mean that he's not a hero. We all know that even the most admirable heroes have caddish moments or worse. in the case of Achilles, beastly moments, brutal moments that we cannot possibly rationalize morally. No. And I don't think these negatives of heroes were meant to be rationalized. They were meant to be shocking. May I circle back, however, to something that I just went through too fast, which is that Agamemnon in our tragedy here, the tragedy of Aeschylus in 458, is king of Argos, not Mycenae. This is very important because only a decade or so earlier did it happen that Argos simply put Mycenae out of business. So the city that Agamemnon is the king of, which was also the nerve center of the Mycenaean Empire, Mycenae, was essentially demolished by Argos, and therefore the whole scene that is supposed to be happening in Mycenae is happening in Argos. And when I take people on travel study, and I know that you, dear Sarah, and you, dear Janet, actually saw this, when we go up to the citadel of Mycenae, frankly, the scene of the night watchman makes much more sense there than it does in how it's reimagined by Aeschylus as happening in Argos, which is several kilometers away, much closer to Nauplio, etc. It's just how shall I say it? A transplanted story. No, I shouldn't say story. Transplanted myth, because again, I'm emphasizing how myth is a part of ritual, is the local truth to any given locale. And yeah, they'll be different from locale to locale, but they're taken very seriously. But what I'm saying is, it boggles my mind how easily there's this switch made in our Agamemnon as produced in 458, and how this does not jibe. It does just not correspond to the Homeric view of what Agamemnon was the king of. He was king of Mycenae, which was the nerve center of the Mycenaean Empire. Argos was simply one of many satellites of Mycenae, but Mycenae was on top. And that's what the Iliad and the Odyssey still convey. And then here we are in 458. Now it's Argos that Agamemnon is ruling. And oh, by the way, Argos is an ally of Athens. How convenient. That's why I'm saying it's so Athenianized that that would cause real troubles, I think, for a Spartan in 458.
Anything else in this hour? I know there were some interesting things from other hours as well.
Yes.
Sarah, you and Jenna had on your minds.
If you like, let's look around the other hours.
Yes, so there was one that, one of the previous hours, for instance, was hour 3, which was the idea of Achilles and Andromache.
And I loved the responses of some of the participants. So that's going to be a never-ending question, but...
Right, and there have been some responses since we recorded the office hour then. One of the participants has asked about the different understanding of the word love. There's eros, and there's the erotic desire, there's the other type of love, for example, as described in Plato's Symposium, moderation and orderliness. So what kind of love might they have had?
Yes. Well, here's that dangerous expression that we use in English, falling in love. And I have such troubles with translating the verb of eros, even in as late a source as Pausanias in the 2nd century CE. Translators, when Pausanias retells a myth, find it so easy to say that X fell in love with Y. But when you look at it, it's really conceived a passion for. And So there's that aspect of what we today call love, but then there's this other aspect, which is being philos, and philos has to do more with the ties that bind, and it's not necessarily sexual, although it can be certainly. And in fact, philotes, that one of the nouns derived from philos, clearly means mostly sex, but it still has to do with establishing relationships and the consequences of relationships. And my favorite here is how Aristotle defines a philos in his ethical works. And he says a philos, which we usually translate as near and dear as an adjective, friend as a noun. Aristotle says that a philos is an allos ego, which is an alter ego. So obviously it's something very personalized. And by personalized, I mean something that requires you to think of how one person relates to another person. So it's a relationship word, which I don't necessarily see in eros. That's before any kind of personal relationship can happen. People can just conceive a desire to have sex with somebody, but that doesn't necessarily come with any kind of bonding. So that helps. It's like if we ask, well, would Achilles and Andromache have been attracted to each other? I'd say you bet. If they had the opportunity, which myth doesn't give them. Would they have developed a loving relationship? I don't know. I don't know, because too many of the stories of Achilles falling in love or being fallen in love with have very, very non-reciprocal outcomes where one person just doesn't respond to the other. So we get into that other problematic English expression, unrequited love. Well, I don't know, to me, unrequited love already implies that there's love on both sides, but unrequited love is clearly one-sided, and it may or may not be reciprocated by another party. So I think it's really our problem how our word love just doesn't match anything. It doesn't match anything very well. But could we say that in terms of chemistry, and that was what piqued my interest and why I asked that question in hour 3, I just bet the chemistry is really good here.
And there's also been some further discussion, for example, in hour 2, which was the question about Phoenix not invoking the muse when he talks about Meleagros and Cleopatra.
Yeah.
And one suggestion that's come up is that he was of that generation, or rather Peleus was of that generation and was present at the boar hunt. And they brought in the example of some vase paintings, which are visual tradition rather than necessarily the same story tradition. But could we say that, for example, he doesn't invoke the muse because he's not telling a myth, he is telling a almost second-hand account from somebody who was there. And is that the same as good as having a muse tell you?
Yeah, I love that. And listen, I used to think that, but I've come around to seeing it differently, in the sense that I think it's uneconomical. There's no need to re-invoke the muse when somebody is telling something inside an epic, because that's already guaranteed by the outer frame.
Right, so it doesn't matter whether it's that generation of myth or an earlier. We've got Nestor also talking about things that happened. But
I grant the questioner the participant who asked this question, which is a very sophisticated question, that there's always wiggle room, that if the mediation is indirect, not direct, that there could be some kind of tampering with whatever the muse guarantees as the real thing, since I, the poet, heard everything from the muse. I heard everything that the muse says about what people did, including what Phoenix said about the story of Meleagros and Cleopatra. So, gee, why couldn't that be also true. But then you can say, what about Odysseus? What about the way Odysseus, when he tells a story, can put a twist on it, which means we have to have something in addition to what a Homeric narrator would say, which would be pretty straightforward. But when Odysseus tells a story, there will be texts and subtexts and subtexts and twists and turns. But even there, I would say there's still the ultimate guarantor is if the muses let the thing get into Homeric tradition, it's good enough as true. It must be true somehow.
Right. Right, thank you.
It's a lovely question.
Greg, I know you have to go soon.
Yes, I have to go. In fact, yes, in less than 5 minutes. Yep.
Is there anything else that we should talk about from the discussion boards?
I think those are the two main things that kind of jumped out.
Well, I so enjoyed them, and we should do this more often. That's such a delight. I just love the way some of these questions revisit us, as they should.
And the conversation is continuing on those questions.
Oh, I just love it.
People come along and people are revisiting them as well. So
I so offer my warmest encouragement to all the participants out there.
Thank you.
Well, friends, thanks for joining me again.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
We'll see you all next time.
Yeah, and thank you.